How risky is too risky? It's a question that I believe doesn't have a perfectly correct answer because there are a lot of different formats and a lot of different ways, as they say, to skin a cat. I don't actually know the etymology of that, and it sounds grotesque. I'm a dog person, and I want my dog with skin on. But today, we'll be talking to the great Noah Rubin, actually in a matter of seconds, mind you, about this very topic and some other stuff that Noah took away from a season gone by. But very quickly, and I forgot to do this, I think, on yesterday's show. Hi, welcome to Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball. Damn it, I got the words right this time. I am Dan Vespris, and this fine gentleman whose brain works better than mine is Noah Rubin. At Noah Rubin 22 on Twitter. Noah, of course, of RotoWorld Fantasy Basketball, the OG. What's going on, dude? It's good to have you on the show.
Dan, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. You mentioned my brain works. I think it's a comparison thing. It doesn't work great. It doesn't work great all the time, but
better.
Not having kids, I think, is kind of it really is a difference maker. So when I get to that point, I'll think of you.
Please do, even if it's just for that fleeting moment before your brain wanders off to some other thought, which is like and it's dumb of me because it's not fair of me to complain. I want these children. I love them dearly. And I chose this, but also I didn't know. Everybody's just like, oh, it's a lot of work. Yeah, that's true. It is a lot of work. Oh, it's so rewarding. Yeah, a lot of the time it is. Not all the time, but a lot of the time. Oh, they're going to make you want to leap off your balcony. Yeah, that's definitely happened. But what they don't tell you is that your brain goes full mush. And I don't know if this is because for thousands of years, all of that fell on the mom. And it's much more recent that dads are actually expected to do stuff, which, by the way, this is a good thing. But now I got full on what has been long known, I think, as mom brain, but now can be known as parent brain. And like, I don't remember what I said at the beginning of that thought anymore. Someday it'll come back, I think. I don't know. I used to be smart. So anyway, we're going to use your brain today because we got to figure out some things to talk about from the last season. And I asked you last night, I was like, don't tell me much because I like to go into these shows pretty fresh, be a little bit surprised and then see where the road takes us. But you were like, I want to talk about Joel Embiid because the season was a bit of a mess, but an interesting mess because Noah, he was the best player in fantasy basketball for 3 months. And then poof, Kaiser Sose, he was gone. This is not uncommon with him, other than really the last, not this season, but the previous one where he mostly made it through a year. So I know you're going to talk about Joel Embiid, but I'm going to expand the topic a little bit right out of the chute and say, what are your thoughts on risk? Because it does seem like that's kind of what this comes down to.
I think there is a number of players that have frequent injuries, frequent serious injuries. Embiid, you have Anthony Davis, who's obviously a quote-unquote injury-prone player. And that was kind of a label that is put on a lot of players. And then I was talking about a lot heading into this past season where I was like, okay, there are these quote-unquote injury-prone players. We don't really know how many games they're going to play, but history, the last 3 or 4 years, tells us that not going to be as many as we want them to if we're going to take them that early. And there was guys that were getting knocked down a few rounds, such as a Kawhi Leonard and a Paul George, where you're like, hey, like this guy, if he plays games, he's going to be a league winner. But he hasn't played enough games for that to happen in years. Embiid had played a few more than those kind of players, but I know guys that you like Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, were guys that still were going in the first round where I was like, hey, KD has hardly played since leaving the Warriors. Like he's had a few years where he's played an okay amount of games, but a lot of years where it's just horrible and it ends up tanking your season. And I was like, I don't know if I want to take a Kevin Durant in the first round. And then it turns out that the guy I took in the first round is the one that ended up being the biggest loss this season based on games, based on like among stars.
Yeah.
I mean, he played 39 regular season games, and that's just, it's not ideal.
No, that's suboptimal. That's very kind terminology. Yeah, I mean, he didn't make it to the halfway point. The remarkable thing that always blows my mind is that despite playing in basically, no games at all, Joel Embiid was still number 47 by totals. Can you believe that?
That's insane.
It's crazy. He was a 4th rounder in half a season. And that's the balance that you have to go into. So This is a question you asked me in a Twitter DM thread last night. I'm just going to pose it to you. And I think Josh actually posted on Twitter a couple days ago. Can you draft Joel Embiid again? Did he burn you so bad? Or is there a point at which you almost kind of have to in drafts? And I feel like, again, this is the scales of justice thing. So where do you sit on that?
Yeah, as much as I want to just let out all my frustrations, because I told you this, I think almost all of my redraft leagues I had Embiid in.
Oh, no.
That wasn't good. It just the way it fell, and then I had him in a dynasty league as well, which also hurt me. But like, I don't think. I mean, I'm not going to take him top 5. I think if it gets to the point where he's closer to end of the first round, it's the values there. Okay, this is a guy that was the best player in fantasy basketball for a while, and per game, I think he still was.
Yeah, number one.
So it's just about games played. And if I'm getting a guy that maybe my expectation would be 60 games of Embiid, 55 games of Embiid. I don't expect him to play a single back-to-back next year. If he does, great. And then I expect him to miss time aside from that. So 55 to 60 games of Embiid, I'm fine with that at pick 12. I'm fine with that at pick 10. I don't know how much earlier than that, but I think there's just too much talent and too much production when he's on the court to totally say never again.
Yeah, and I think I'm probably in the same boat with you on that one. I want to try to do a little bit of a devil's advocate in general on these shows, but I don't know that I can play the opposite side. Just thinking about last year, he missed 16 games, which for him was very good. So 66 out of 82. He was the number 2 player. He and Jokic were basically tied for the number 1 spot. He was still number 3 by totals. So it's not that hard for someone with his per game ability. I mean, the numbers this year are astronomical, or were, because, played half a season. 35 points, 11 rebounds, 5.5 assists, almost 3 defensive stats, big positives in both field goal and free throw percent. And he hit 1.5 threes a game, which got him to almost league average there. It's so rare to find a guy who's a positive in 8 or 9 categories. And he basically was that, and not a minor one in a lot of them. So that's that thing again, where if he's let's say you take him at 10 or something like that. I don't know if he's going to fall that far, but he really only needs to get to probably about 60 ball games to be a first round value at the pace he plays. Does it change your opinion on this calculus if Philly brings in someone like a Paul George or a Jimmy Butler? Because we've heard them linked to a couple of other. I know Butler is not your typical high usage guy, but he has the ball in his hands. And it's just someone besides Embiid and Maxey that could do a thing on offense on that team. Does that change where you put that kind of window on Joel?
I don't think so. I think it would pretty much be the same as far as would I move him back and say, ooh, that might be a little too early for me. I just don't think that he would be the one taking a massive step back on offense. I would think it would be Paul George or Jimmy Butler, who is a little bit older. Both of them are, and can play without the ball in their hands. Embiid is just too good for them to say, we're going to dial back the usage. Now, they may dial back the games, dial back the minutes by a couple, because that flexibility that they have by having Tyrese Maxey and George or Butler. But when Embiid's on the floor, he's just too good for them to not have the ball in his hands as much as possible. So 10, I would be comfortable with. Any earlier, I'd probably just have to see who else is on the board.
I feel like, and it's hard for us to know. We can dream a little bit here, but I feel like as the season approaches and we start to see that draft board, a lot of this is going to come down to the other guys that end up with an ADP nearby. Are they exciting?
Right.
Are they shiny enough? Is it going to be, trying to think of what the end of the first round looked like this year? I think it was like Kevin Durant, Anthony Davis, Kyrie Irving,
Trae Young,
Donovan Mitchell,
LaMelo.
and a little bit later. Yeah, LaMelo. Yeah. So like, if these are depending, and it's not going to be the same group there. Well, let me ask you this question first, because now my brain is doing this thing where it tries to go in 6 directions. I warned you all. I think Embiid probably still goes at like 6 or 7. Do you think he falls farther than that?
I don't think
It's hard, right?
He might fall a little bit farther. I can't imagine him falling out of the first round. I think 6 or 7. I can't be mad at somebody for taking him there, but I probably just wouldn't. I want to say there's one of the mocks I've already done. He slid a ridiculous amount, but some of these early mocks have been kind of crazy.
You got
But
yeah, you've got all the
but
rage.
it's an early mock,
Yeah.
so
Everybody's taking out their frustrations from this year on the
yes.
very early mocks, and then next year's going to come around and it's going to be like, I don't really want to take that guy there, but ooh, there's Joel. All right, let's actually play a little game here, and then I want to get to your other main topic, which I think was probably your bigger one anyway. But I did this to Mike Catron earlier this week, where he was like, I had 2 topics, and the one that I really wanted to talk about, we didn't even get to talk about. That's the best way. Let's just play a little game, and you have the mock that you could probably look at. Who do you think goes? Who do we can do it together. Who do we think goes in front of Embiid? It'll be Shea, Jokic, Luka. Do we know for sure anyone else goes ahead of Embiid?
Wemby, I would say.
Wemby, sorry, yeah, Wemby, obviously.
Yeah. I think those are the guys that 100%. Did you say Halliburton?
I did not. You think Hallie goes ahead of Joel?
I would take him ahead of Joel. And
that one's iffy for me. That one, I'd be in a brutal brain struggle. Now, I guess some of that it's like a head-to-head versus GamesCap Roto discussion too, but because the difference between those two guys, and I know Halliburton had the after the hamstring. There's the AH and the BH part of the year before hammy and after hammy for Halliburton, but I don't know. I have trouble finding someone else I'd want to take at 5 that has a really obvious case to be number 5 that isn't the guy who could be number 1. I'm struggling.
That's fair. That's probably the extent of the list that I would 100% like above Embiid, excluding Halliburton, because obviously you're not 100% on that. So I can't say that would be the guy who would be guaranteed to go in front of Embiid. But there's guys that have arguments. I mean, you could argue an Anthony Davis over Embiid, I think. Like, if we're going based off games from this past season, I'd rather have 75 games of AD. And that's, obviously that's going to play a little bit of recency bias there. But Donovan Mitchell, probably a conversation. Giannis, a conversation. But yeah, you're right. Those are the safe guys that I would say definitely before Embiid.
So really, it is a very, very hard job. And I don't think anyone's going to want the 5th pick this season. That's, I think, what we just solved on this podcast, by the way. What pick don't you want? Number 5. It was like, if you get like pick 8, then those other guys are out of the way and you're like, all right, fine. I can take Joel here. I feel a little bit better about it. But at 5, you're like, oh, I probably should take Embiid, but I really don't want to. And then you back into it, and then he plays 39 games, and you're mad at yourself the whole year.
But if you don't take him, he's going to play 75.
Exactly right. The other guy's going to get him, and that dude's going to boat race the league because you got Embiid in the middle of the first round. So because I've delayed your actual main topic long enough, we can get to that now. By the way, talking again to Noah Rubin at Noah Rubin 22 on Twitter of RotoWorld Fantasy Basketball. Your other topic involves tanking teams, correct?
It does. It does indeed.
All right, what do you got?
Man, so the other topic was just for me to vent my frustrations about having Joel Embiid and getting kind of ruined by that. So this is, I had one league where I had Embiid and Desmond Bane, and that sucked too because I didn't expect Memphis to be a tanking team. I think they had, was it 31 players suit up for them, which was an NBA record? Like
it was something
30.
Yeah. But I mean, their top 6 were basically out for the year at some point, I think, right? Or they traded one of them after he was out for the year. That still counts.
Yeah, I mean,
you're right.
Timmy Allen wasn't on.
Right, even with Ja out for 25, you figured they'd be like bottom pack, but still fighting for it. And then he played 2.5, 3 weeks and was out again. So what do you do with this info?
Well, you don't put Timmy Allen on your draft board originally, and you probably don't ever pick him up until April 9th. But I mean, it's a difficult situation because there's teams such as Portland. One of the guys that I mentioned is Dwop Reith, who just was not on anybody's draft board preseason and shouldn't have been, but ended up having some solid stretches where they just didn't have DeAndre Ayton healthy. Obviously, Robert Williams wasn't healthy. and it was just next man up. And I don't think that those kinds of things are things that you can prepare for going into a season, other than maybe to have a list of guys on bad teams that, hey, maybe, for example, in Charlotte, well, that was even after they traded for Vasily Micic, that he had a strong end to the season. Charlotte may not be good this year. LaMelo's had ankle injuries. Who's the next point guard in Charlotte who would benefit a little bit? And maybe gambling a little bit there and saying maybe some of these guys aren't going to play a full season. And not that's like a new idea, but I think it is something that you have to keep in mind. Injury history for players on bad teams. Maybe that's something.
Now, if we're looking at it from a tanking standpoint, this is interesting. I think there's a few angles to pursue here. The first angle is who to avoid, correct?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what do you think? Have you looked? Well, you're a dynasty guy. Have you looked ahead towards next year at who you think the absolute worst non-competitive teams in the league are likely to be?
I mean, it has to be Washington. Like,
That's have to. Yeah,
I can't think of anybody else that in theory should be as bad as them. But I mean, that's a dynasty mindset of Detroit has all of these young guys, and there's just no way that they're gonna be this bad again, right? And then,
and
it's
then
Detroit and everything falls apart again.
yeah.
But
Is there any tanking team? Are the Blazers the only obvious bad team in the Western Conference next year?
they might be. Trying to think of who else. It might just be them now. Wow, that is
Isn't that nuts?
pretty crazy.
And the
Yeah.
East, you've got the Wizards, as you just said,
Hmm.
and then you've got like 4 question mark teams. The Pistons, because I think they're going to try, but they might still be really bad. So then it's like, okay, how close are they to being like play-in eligible? They might be like 6 games out, and that'll be a situation where they don't sit their guys until they're mathematically eliminated. And you might have a similar thing going on with the Hornets, the Raptors,
Hmm.
the Nets, depending on what they do, either whether they are acquiring or selling off here. It's hard to say. And what are the Hawks about to do? Question mark. Well, they just got the number 1 pick, so they should probably try. Or maybe that's the start of the magical rebuild. Hey, we got number 1. The rebuild was just gifted to us. Sell off parts. Like, all that to say, Noah, is there anyone more specifically head to head? Because Roto, whatever you accrue the first 4.5 months of the season, that all stays in your bucket. Like, the end of the season is not that important, no more important in Roto than at the beginning. Where in head to head, you run into the playoffs. It feels like the Blazers and the Wizards are the 2 teams that you can kind of check mark and say, if I'm drafting these guys, I have to go into my season expecting I won't have them for my head to head playoffs. Yes, no, maybe so.
I want to, like, in theory, yes. I fell into the trap last year of, hey, Dame's gone. Jeremy Grant's going to be really good, and he was pretty good. Wasn't as good as I expect him to be, and then obviously just fell off a cliff. Didn't play basketball anymore after at some point.
He did the Jeremy Grant, I think, at this point.
Yeah,
He's got it
and
named after him.
I don't know what, in like, I was thinking to the point where I was like, you know what, this is the Jeremy Grant year. This is going to be it. But I think he's a guy that it's kind of in that similar boat, same boat. Malcolm Brogdon maybe, and then in Washington, like a Kyle Kuzma. But I think on the other side of that, if you would have done that this past season, said, hey, Washington's going to stink, there's no way I'm going to draft this Daniel Gafford guy. And then you'd be missing out on his production because he got traded. And same thing in Charlotte with PJ Washington. I'm not saying that the fantasy value was incredible after he went to Dallas, but guys that could be trade bait. I think there's so many unknown factors there that it's hard to kind of go into a draft and say, I definitely don't want to get this guy, or I definitely going to want to get this guy because he's going to start off really good on this bad team. And then at the trade deadline, maybe he gets traded and still has some value after that. So those are things that you can't really predict, but they end up being pretty big factors.
I love, by the way, that that's the direction you went with this. That was the direction I was hoping you'd go, because the opposite side of the coin, which doesn't get talked about in fantasy draft season, is maybe as big or even bigger. when you're talking about teams at the top that start to sit guys down the stretch. And suddenly you're now losing your first and second round picks. It's like you didn't look, let's be honest, you didn't have to spend a ton of draft capital on Jeremy Grant. You probably got him in like the 7th round or something like that. And so when he gets shut down the stretch, it's annoying, but it doesn't break your fantasy team the way that, okay, here's a team maybe near the top of the board. And it might have been the Celtics this year, which is weird to say because like Tatum played in 74 ball games, but most of the games the Boston main dudes missed were down the stretch. I think they had like a pair of 5 and 7s during the fantasy playoffs, which should have been the greatest scheduling quirk of all time. And most of their key guys played in 3 out of every one of those 5 and 7 stretches. So maybe it's the other side that we should be super worried about, because the number of quote unquote tank teams feels, I think, bigger than what it is in reality. You pointed at Memphis. No one really knew that was happening anyway. So it's not like we could have gone into the draft and gone, be careful with Memphis. Like, no, seemed like a really cool place to take the non-Ja Morant guys, get 25 games of max performance out of them, and then just ride out the rest of the year while they fought for probably the, 8, 9, 10, whatever in the West. And then everybody got hurt. Ja went down, Bane went down, Smart went down, Steven Adams missed the entire year and got traded. Jaren Jackson was somehow like largely healthy this year in all of that nonsense. I know, go figure. And so then they were done. Blazers probably was one we could have seen coming, because once they traded Dame, you knew that was leaning into it. Wizards without Beal was semi-predictable. But a lot of the Wizards, Jordan Poole basically played down the stretch this year. He had his best run of the season. His only fantasy usable run down the season was after the All-Star break. So maybe I'm like drawing a line to the thing I wanted to draw a line to here. But the conclusion that I've taken away from a lot of this, which is what you just said, is sometimes we think we can predict it and we really can't still. Is that, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but is that fair?
Yeah,
but
maybe
I'm going to put words in your mouth, by the way.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's exactly what I was going to say. But I think it is something that maybe we try and overthink and say, okay, like I think that this exact thing is, even in my example was, this player that might start off really well and then maybe he gets traded to this team because they need this starting small forward to elevate them to the next level. And it's September, October, and you're predicting what February is going to look like. Like it's something we really can't do ahead of fantasy drafts. But we try to because it makes us sound like, because we got the crystal ball in front of us. But with Jordan Poole, he played really well when he was playing point guard because Tyus Jones was out, which is another guy that was very solid for most of the year and then didn't play the final few weeks. Jordan Poole stepped into the point guard role after playing shooting guard and was really good. In Boston, yes, those guys sat down the stretch. Peyton Pritchard was at the top of my waiver wired columns, the top of my pickups of the day columns, like for weeks, just because I was like, hey, they are having these 5 games in 7 days. They have 2 back-to-backs. Half the starters are going to play on one of them. Half of them are going to play in the other. And Peyton Pritchard's going to start 4 games this week and give you really good numbers. Pick him up. So it's, again, not a conversation that you can have in October because we didn't know Boston was going to be 10 games better than everybody. But it's something I think as the season progresses, hey, maybe keep this guy flagged on the app. That way you can add him as they start resting players.
I love it. Let's earmark this too, Noah, because I want to talk to you again we're going to talk sooner than that about other stuff, but I want to circle back to this idea in September-ish, somewhere in that neck of the woods where we can say, okay, now we've seen free agency play out. We've seen whatever news we get between then, summer league, blah, blah, blah. There's a decent amount of info. You don't have training camp yet, but like we're not going to do a show on tanking the day before the season starts. But I would like to follow up on this topic with you to see if we have any more data to work with. Okay, this team is obviously going to be bad. Here's something we can do. The only thing I'm sitting on right now, and feel free to tell me I'm wrong, right? Argue with me, I don't care, is I probably wouldn't invest a first, second, maybe third round pick in a player on a team that I think is going to be like an 18 win team. But I don't know that I don't know that any of the teams this year had that at the, but I guess Cade was probably like a third rounder, but that, and
LaMelo.
LaMelo. But I honestly thought the Hornets were going to be lightly competitive this year. Not like good, but I thought they'd make a run at the Eastern Conference play-in tournament, and then they were 15 games out of the last spot, and obviously LaMelo not playing at all, was played 22 games this season. That's pretty rough. But that's the kind of team I think we could circle back to in a couple of months and say, all right, is LaMelo, like, is he going to be playing this year? Did they do things that are positive or negative coming out of the draft, free agency, that sort of stuff? There's a very long way of me saying, can we talk about this again in like 2.5, 3 months?
I'd be happy to. It sounds like a lot of fun.
All right, Noah, tell me what you got going on these days. I know we got Tank Me Later. You and I just did that late last week. What are you working on over at the big RW? Noah Rubin 22, by the way, on Twitter. Promo time. Tell me what you got going on in the land of Noah.
Yeah, the Tank Me Later podcast, trying to do roughly one episode per week, with the draft coming up, maybe extra because it's a Dynasty podcast.
Nice.
And then over at RotoWorld, we've been having daily team recaps come out. Me, Raphael Johnson, and Zach Hanshu have been doing those. I actually just started a couple weeks ago doing a weekly WNBA column for RotoWorld, which has been fun. It's been a learning experience for me, trying to learn more about the WNBA as I share what I'm learning with people who want to play fantasy WNBA, which is also something I do, and it's a lot of fun.
That's super cool. I was about to ask if that was going to be an article that was fantasy bending also. Where I feel like WNBA fantasy, is it mostly people you find that know a ton about the WNBA, so it's like really, really, really competitive? Or is it a lot of people, like if I dove in, that are trying to figure it out on the fly? So is it like a soft market to go take everybody's money, or is it impossible to take anyone's money right now?
So I think I did 2 leagues last year, 1 league this year, and it's a dynasty league that was orchestrated by Matt Lawson. So playing with people who definitely know what they're talking about. So I made the playoffs somehow first year, and I'm 2-1 right now. So
attaboy.
But it's dynasty. So if I'm not doing good, then hey, I have Paige. Hey, I have Juju the next 2 drafts. I want to get them on my team. You can't lose in dynasty. That's why I like it so much.
That's outstanding. I love it. Noah, I'm letting you get back to your day. Thank you so much for coming on. Thank you for having me, by the way, on your show as well. That was very kind of you. Let's do this again very soon.
Absolutely.
He is again at Noah Rubin 22. Noah at RotoWorld Fantasy Basketball. So long, my good man. I love that dude. Tank Me Later podcast. I think I did a pun about that a couple days ago, which is what it's for. It's punny. I like puns. I like wordplay. Bring me your words and I will play with them. We're going to thank Noah right now. Thank you, Noah, for coming on the pod and bringing. So this tank thing is really, it's fun. I know it gets, a lot of people get really caught up in this idea that you cannot ever draft players on teams that you think are going to be bad. But one of the prime examples of that flipping the opposite way is folks who avoided Shea, not this season, but last season, when he made that big jump, the huge jump Shea year, which again, he was going in like the mid to late 20s for a while. And then there was word about an injury during the preseason that dropped him into the 40s. And then news came out like 5 days before the season started that he was going to be ready to go on opening night. And that didn't really hit fast enough. So a lot of those very late drafts 2 years back, Shea Gilgeous-Alexander was going at like 45 and he finished at number 3. I mean, that was a league winning type of deal in a situation where folks thought the Thunder were going to be throwing in the towel on that year. And every year there are really easy examples to find in each direction of this type of stuff happening, where somebody gets avoided because people think their team is going to be awful. And then it flips back. And like we mentioned Tyus Jones a minute ago, He did end up playing 66 ball games. He missed the last couple of weeks, but I'm hoping that most head-to-head leagues were done by then. I think the Yahoo Public Prize leagues were still rolling because they went until the penultimate week of the year. But like most head-to-head leagues that I was in that were commissionered by a human and not a system ended 3 weeks early. And I would actually offer that this coming season, you may want to end your leagues 4 weeks early because tank season started with about 3.5 weeks to go. So if you end your league 4 weeks early, this type of stuff doesn't really get you. And then Jordan Poole, who we just talked about with Noah a minute ago, he was number 135 for the season per game, but he played in 78 ball games this year. 78 freaking ball games this year. He did not sit out tank season. And more than that, Jordan Poole was finally playable during tank season. He was number 92, by the way, overall on the year. So a bump from actually playing ball games. But I think maybe most importantly was the fact that he was a top 70 play down the stretch. He was not, if you just got to slice out basically March and April, Jordan Poole wasn't all that far away from his ADP. Still a little bit underneath it, but not that far. And he was a guy that the main reason people were talking about avoiding him was because they thought the Wizards were going to be bad. I wanted to avoid him because I figured he was going to be a punt field goal guy, and then it was all this other stuff on top of that made him terrible. But like Tyus Jones, as we just talked about, only really missed like the last 3.5 weeks. Might have even been less than that. He missed some games in the middle of the year as well. Things got funky around March 25th or so. So it's not that hard to dodge this stuff. The things that got real screwy this year was Memphis, who Noah brought up as well, because they lost everybody in the middle of the season. And so they pre-tanked or like mid-tanked. And there was really nothing you could do about that. They basically shut everybody down in like January. And then Desmond Bane came back and played a few games late, as did Jaren Jackson Jr. He mostly played down the stretch, give or take. The Spurs, who were just like real bad, and most of their guys were dudes I didn't trust anyway. And then the Blazers. The Blazers were kind of the predictable one. They had a few veterans on that team that was set to be bad, and those veterans largely didn't play down the stretch. Malcolm Brogdon didn't really play after the All-Star break. Jeremy Grant didn't play much after the All-Star break. DeAndre Ayton did play a little bit, but that's only because he missed a bunch of time earlier in the year. So I would say be careful with your super early picks on tanking teams because it's weird and it could impact you if something terrible happens sooner than you expect. But by and large, you can fix this by just ending your league a little bit early. And sometimes you can even catch lightning in a bottle by getting someone like an SGA, who my good buddy Chris Chow watching live says, I got him cheap that year in a keeper league too. Yeah, he was a monster. He was a league-changing pick, partially because of the injury news, but partially because folks didn't trust the Thunder. We're going to try to win ball games. I have to admit, I didn't think they were going to try to win ball games. But Shea in the mid to late 40s was a crazy steal, even if he sat the last 3 weeks of the year. And you can think about it from that perspective. Do I care if this player sits out the last 3 weeks? Are they still valuable enough to make an impact on my team? And the answer is often still yes, even if somebody burned you in the not that distant past. I mean, the biggest issue, Joel Embiid, not tanking. That was just straight injury. It's a lot of guessing that goes on with this stuff. Not all of it, but some. Folks, I want to remind everybody to please, if you're watching this on social media, which the vast majority of you continue to do, please go subscribe somewhere else, whether it's a traditional feed like an iTunes or a Spotify or YouTube that has the video element built in as well. Please, I beg of you, go subscribe someplace else, like, rate and review, retweet, whatever it is you can do to help people understand that this is a new podcast feed. And it hit me as I was setting up my very silly backdrop, the draft board that will never go away, that a lot of people watching this, specifically those watching on Twitter, there isn't really an obvious thing saying this isn't the same old feed that Dan's been doing. Nothing changed for you folks. I booted up a live show on my social media account at Dan Vespris, and it's just there for you guys to see. And there's some graphics in the corners that say Old Man Squad and blah, blah, blah. But if you're not paying super close attention, you might not have even noticed. So again, if you're watching on Twitter, please go subscribe on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, whatever. This build-up process is extraordinarily important for me, especially once we hit August, September, when people start to tune back into the NBA. I want to make sure everybody knows where I am already, and I don't know that everybody does. So please help. Please and thank you. 5-star reviews also helpful. Much obliged. Tomorrow, again, barring any sort of scheduling setback, we will talk to the punt master himself, Adam G. Stock of Elite Fantasy Basketball. Very, very good at punting, and he does it in a way that, just talked about this with Keith Cork on Tuesday, you zig when they zag. You zag when they zig. Adam Stock doesn't punt the obvious stuff. Field goal percent is kind of the obvious one. Free throw percent is probably the second most obvious one. Turnovers is one that everybody punts. Adam has come on this show multiple years, not this show, the old feed, but me. He's talked to me. It's me. I'm very important. Adam and I have spoken a number of times over the years about the power of punting categories that other people are targeting. That's why I love punting points. Everybody's always hunting points. You can build a freaking fierce team by just flipping the whole draft board on its head. Nobody wants the guys you want. You can get anybody you want in a punt points team. The only thing you got to do there, well, we'll get into this with Adam tomorrow. If we don't, then I'll just rant and rave about punting points for a half an hour. That's not true. I'll probably talk about the actual Old Man Squad. We still got to finish that up. We've only done the centers. We still got the wings and the guards to go through. That's probably 3 or 4 more shows worth. But damn it, I have guests these days, and it's more fun for me to talk to them. So sorry to you guys who want to hear about how all my old men did this past season. Some of them not that old, but certainly quite boring. We will get to that. Fear not. This is Old Man Squad Fantasy Basketball and Old Man Squad Sports Network presentation. Before I go, I want to give a shout out to some of our newest members of the Old Man Squad Sports Network. This is a really exciting time for me, by the way. We have brought on, oh my goodness, my kid just scared the living bejesus out of me. Theodore's here. Hi, buddy. Hey, dude. Welcome to the podcast. We were just about to wrap things up. Something happened in my settings, and I don't know what happened there. So that's my kid. That's Theodore. He is visiting. He's back home from the park, as is obvious. So, Theo, I was just going to tell everybody about the fact that the Old Man Squad Sports Network has a bunch of new shows coming out on it. You've heard me tell you about mine. We'll have a Dodgers and Lakers show coming up. And you've heard me talk to you about Joe's show, 90 Feet From Home Fantasy Baseball. And you've heard me tell you about my buddy Eric Ong and the Fantasy Fast Break. But Joe Bond and the Fantasy Six Pack, part of the Old Man Squad Sports Network. Kings Weekly, the unrestricted area pods from Ray, Mike, and Nick. They are members now. Bird Rights Pod and One and Done from Stephen Bagel. And we've got Going for Two Pod Network from Jeff Lambert, officially on the network. And on top of that, we have 1, 2, 3, 4 more that might be announceable as soon as next week. That's awesome. And I am so flattered. If you guys want to be a part on the hosting side or whatever it is you do, hit me up at Dan Vespris on Twitter. Again, talking to Adam Stock tomorrow. Thank you again to the great Noah Rubin. Thank you to Theodore, my child, who's making silly faces at the camera. I will see you guys tomorrow. Later for now.